morning, everyone. Before we get started, I just want to mention that a lot of people have found us on Facebook over the last month, and we're excited about that. We're glad that you have found us, and hope that the devotionals and things that we're doing are helping you to grow spiritually, and especially if you live here around the church here in Syracuse. When this is lifted and we get a chance to meet again, I really want to extend an invitation to you to come and meet us in person and worship with us together. And in the meantime, let us know how we can pray for you, what God is doing in your life. And again, we want to be able to uh, transform our community. And if you're here in Syracuse and want to be a part of a congregation, you don't have a church, and you want to be part of a church that is really focused on transforming its community, then this may be a home for you. So we just want to invite you to come and visit us in person. And even before that, reach out to us, let us know how we can be praying for you and what God is doing in your life. So with that, let's get into Luke chapter 19. So we've been talking about prayer during this week. We're going to go to the next passage that may not have to do with prayer specifically, but it's really cool, and I want to bring it out to you. So Luke chapter 19 starts with the story of Zacchaeus, who is a tax collector, and it's one of the most famous children's stories. There's a song that goes along with it. Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he. So let me read it for you. It says in Luke chapter 19, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there named Zacchaeus. And he was the chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed the sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot where he looked up and he said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down and at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people that saw this began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." So I just want to mention a few things. I'm going to be preaching about this on Sunday, so I don't want to give it all away now. But some of the real cool connections that I wasn't going to even preach about Zacchaeus, because it was just like, okay, everybody knows about Zacchaeus. But the more I got into it, I started to realize it's really going back and hitting all the things that we've already seen. We saw the parable of the rich man and the poor man. The poor man goes to heaven and the rich man goes to hell. And then we saw Jesus talking about in chapter 17, don't just do what you're supposed to do, but when you're a servant, don't do what's required of you only. If you do, you should come home and say, I'm such an unworthy servant because I've only done what's been required of me. You should do more than that. We talked about that in our devotionals. Jesus talks about the coming of the kingdom and his second coming. He says, when I come, don't go running into your house to grab things, right? Don't let this world hold you back from receiving me when I come. And he mentioned Lot's wife who looked back. Don't look back. Don't desire the things of this world. Don't let the things of this world hold you back. Then the parable of the persistent widow that we looked at this week, right? The persistent widow, the tax collector and the Pharisee. These were stories. A tax collector and a Pharisee go into the temple. One humbles himself, the other exalts himself. Then he mentions little children. You have to become like a little child to follow me. And then the rich young man who comes to Jesus, and Jesus says, it's so hard for the rich to enter heaven. Easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. The disciples say, well, then who can be saved? And Jesus says, what's impossible for man is possible for God. So, and then we get to Bartimaeus, which we talked about this week, his gut-wrenching prayer. But what I realize is all of this goes together. When Luke wrote the gospel, there were no chapters. So there's nothing to separate chapter 18 from 19, the story of the blind beggar from the story of Zacchaeus. I think they're supposed to go together, because you see this contrast Jesus is constantly doing of one man and another man, a sinner and someone who, even a self-righteous person. And the interesting thing is, as we look at the story, you have both Zacchaeus and the blind beggar. are persistent in their pursuit, right? Just like be persistent. Well, the blind beggar was persistent. They tried to shut him up. He kept crying out, and Jesus met him, or he met Jesus. Zacchaeus, he was persistent. He was too short. The people wouldn't let him see, so he runs ahead to get into a tree to see Jesus, right? He was persistently pursuing Jesus. Not only that, he was both of them in a sense was a childlike pursuit, right? Grown men don't climb trees, but you have this guy climbing a tree, which is what kids do, right? So and this desire to meet, to see Jesus as he came through, and and when Zacchaeus gives his life to God, when he gives half of what he has to the poor, he gives restitution 4 times as much of whatever he had robbed or stole it from anybody, if he'd wronged anybody. And remember, Jesus says, don't just give what you're supposed to, but give even more or do even more. Well, the only thing Zacchaeus needed to do according to the law was maybe give double, but he goes all the way to 4. And plus, he gives half to the poor. So he goes, we're seeing all of these things that have been mentioned in these parables and these stories and these teachings now illustrated in real life situations. You have 2 real people that are sharing, that are experiencing this. And the good thing here is that in the other stories, you have the one who is accepted and the one who is rejected. In this case, both meet Jesus, both accept God. And the radical transformation doesn't happen just with the poor man, but with Zacchaeus, he is actually born again and saved. And remember, in the rich man and the poor man, there was the radical reversal where the one who was poor is now rich, the one that was hungry is now full, and the one that was full is now hungry. Well, here, the reversal occurs during Zacchaeus' life. The one who was greedy is now giving. The one who stole is now returning. The one who didn't care about the poor is now giving to the poor, right? So he's experiencing. Remember, I told you the guy in the parable, if he had given his life to Christ the day before he died, then he would also be with Lazarus in heaven. Well, here we have a real life example of that. A thief, an extorter, who is now, you see fruit of his change and transformation. And even more than that, proof of it is the poor man, Lazarus, right? He was known by name. The rich man in that story had no name. Well, here, Zacchaeus is the one who is known by name, right? Now he's named specifically. Again, identity. Jesus looks at him and says, Zacchaeus, come down from here. I'm going to spend time at your house today. So I'm going to unpack this more on Sunday, but just looking back and seeing all the connections, all the things that we've been reading over the last few chapters are illustrated in the story of the blind beggar and Zacchaeus. And again, it's intentional. There's no way it's not intentional. It's masterfully spoken and inspired by Jesus through Luke, the writer of Luke. And so I hope that encourages you. Let's continue, all right, to pursue him, to seek him in a childlike way, right? In a childlike way, and we'll meet him, right? We will meet him. So again, tune in on Sunday. I'm going to unpack it a whole lot more. But for today, let's just, again, be excited as you have your devotion. Sit there and look back at all the connections I'm referring to. And let it teach you a little bit how to study the Word, right? Don't just read what you're reading, but look back and, well, how does this connect to what I've read? And as you're going forward, continue to look back and see the connections that are right there in front of us, but that often we miss. And just try to be childlike today in your heart. So again, Lord bless you, and have a great weekend. Let's worship together on Sunday. And we'll be back with our devotionals on Monday. God bless.